And let's bring in the Deputy Liberal Leader Sussan Ley now. And Andrew Clennell reporting this afternoon that these changes are under consideration, but there'd be no scrapping of the the stage 3 tax cuts completely. Do you welcome that?
Kieran, these were tax cuts that were promised to the Australian people. They're owed to the Australian people, and they are expected by the Australian people, by millions of Australians. They're legislated, they're in law, and already we're seeing Labor breaking another promise, walking away. We've got different ministers on different days saying different things. Yesterday, the Finance Minister, the second most important person when putting the budget together, said, "We haven't changed things yet." And that's really telling. Today, I think we had the Assistant Treasurer, the Assistant Finance Minister saying, "Oh, well, there's lots of views." And the thing I find interesting, Kieran, is every time a Labor Party spokesperson stands up, they say, "Oh, they're not happening yet." It seems to be the first thing they want to say. And clearly, there is a broken promise, there is a lot of dissension within the government, and there is no Prime Minister, no Anthony Albanese standing up. But, you know, I have this article from July 2021, leading into the last election. They obviously didn't want a discussion on this issue. An Albanese Labor government will deliver the same legislated tax relief to more than 9 million Australians as the Morrison government. And he goes on to make that crystal clear. What do we have today?
Is any amendment at all unacceptable to you and the opposition?
Well, of course it is. As I said, these tax cuts have been legislated. They're promised. They're baked in, as many of your commentators have said. And people went to the last election on them. And the Labor Party reassured Australians that they were on a unity ticket with the coalition. Now, it doesn't surprise me, and we warned as we went into the last election that a Labor Party is always disposed to increase taxes. They will always be the party of higher taxes. But a broken promise on this is it's pretty ordinary. And my question this morning remains my question now in the early afternoon. Where is Anthony Albanese and what has he got to say? The Treasurer has come out. He said, you know, my job as Treasurer is to do all these things. Well, there's really only one job as Treasurer, is to back in and promise and underscore your earlier commitment to stage 3 tax cuts.
If the Prime Minister and Treasurer are receiving advice that, given the inflationary environment we face, the uncertainty internationally, that this would help the RBA in its efforts to take a bit of heat out of the economy, if they were to rein in the tax cuts, are they not on solid ground in doing that?
No, they're not, because these tax cuts are legislated. They have already resolved the issues, the modelling, the discussion. And by the way, there is never a good time to raise taxes. When we're in a growth period or when we need more money in the economy and we need to help people's financial budgets at home, there is never a good time to raise taxes. And that's the main message from us today. But you've got a Labor government here that is looking for excuses to raise taxes, and that's all it is, excuses to walk away from a promise. This is the second broken promise. Remember the first one? 97 times during the election campaign, Anthony Albanese said households would get $275 reduction to their electricity bill, and has not mentioned that once. So this is lining up another broken promise.
Do you welcome, at the very least, this information that we've reported this afternoon, that there will be no scrapping entirely of the stage 3 tax cuts, albeit there might be some amendments? Do you welcome the fact that they won't be scrapped?
That's a whole lot of weasel words and wriggle room, and you can drive a truck through it and you can see it a mile away. And where I come from in rural Australia, you can smell it a mile away too, Kieran. It is looking for excuses, and it is simply not backing in a promise made in July last year. The Shadow Cabinet and Caucus have today confirmed that Labor in government will uphold the legislated changes to personal income taxes and maintain the existing regimes for negative gearing and capital gains tax. I mean, you cannot get more clear than that. And then Labor is providing certainty and clarity to Australian working families after a difficult 2 years for our country and the world. So that's the environment we were in then, that's the promise that was made then, and that is the promise, it appears, the government is about to walk away from. So no, talking about amendments, talking about doing things a bit differently, talking about putting it off till later, none of that is acceptable. This was a promise made and it needs to be kept.
You look at the analysis I mentioned earlier to Andrew Clennell from the ANZ, which points out, like others have done, by 2024 we could well be facing a weaker economy where tax cuts are appropriate. Do you see that as the flaw as well in any advice the government might be given right now about the pressure within our economy and the need to maybe rein in those tax cuts? Because by 2024 we're talking about an entirely different kettle of fish.
Well, the reality is we don't know what 2024 will look like, and a weakened economy may not be the right environment to cut taxes. Back to my first point, Kieran, there is never a good time to raise taxes, and that's a key difference between ourselves and the Labor Party, and that's something we warned when we went to the last election. So forecasting something that, you know, is not, doesn't have a high degree of confidence and using that as an excuse to break a promise now, to walk away from something that's already in legislation, that just doesn't cut it.
We've seen over recent years governments that have made promises and then broken them early in their term. It comes back to bite. You saw it closely with the Liberal government and then previously with the Julia Gillard commitments as well. Does this potentially help you to get back in the game if this broken promise is it does follow through? I was going to say fulfilled, but it's hardly fulfilled when you're breaking a promise. If this happens, will that help you get back in the game?
Look, getting in and out of the game is not the point here. I agree with your central premise there, Kieran, that broken promises are treated harshly by the voters, particularly when they're already legislated, they're already in law, and they've already been guaranteed. You know, we did see this with the carbon tax. That was another indication that the Labor Party likes tax, they like raising tax, and they take the easy way out by taxing the Australian people. So our main message today is guarantee these stage 3 income taxes that you promised, that you backed in more than once, but that you now appear to be walking away from.
What do you say to those critics of stage 3? There are many that are saying that the money should be spent elsewhere, that there is a lot more that can be done with it outside of tax cuts.
There are people in the economy who are there are people who are waiting for these tax cuts because they were promised, owed and expected. And, you know, if you're busting your gut and working 60, 70 hours a week and you're trying to pay off a mortgage in Sydney, where I'm standing now, and we know the cost of mortgages here, you know, when you want to put money perhaps away for your retirement, you probably don't appreciate that you, between $120,000 and $180,000 are being described by the Labor Party as rich. And remember, people on incomes as low as $45,000 start to get tax relief from 32.5 cents in the dollar to 30 cents in the dollar on the next dollar they earn. So it's important to do the analysis, which was all done by us, which was supported by the Australian people, and which would make a big difference to Australian households. Tradies, people in the resources industry, train drivers, you know, people who, as I said, are working really hard to save, and you know, they have those aspirations for themselves and their families. They're not rich, Kieran, and they also went to the last election knowing that there was a unity ticket on stage 3 tax cuts.
Sussan Ley, Deputy Liberal Leader, thanks. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you.